All right, so the next stage of our deck here is we're gonna go ahead and install our handrails. We're gonna do 3 different handrails on this deck. Typically you would just choose one and do that for the whole deck, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm gonna do 3 different hand railings to show you the different types. The first thing that you wanna do before you actually start installing your handrails is to make sure that your posts are all cut off right at the right height, as well as they're secure. All of our posts are going to be nice and secure because we went ahead and buried at least 4 feet of our post into the ground. That's going to help secure it, and then they're also secured to the deck. So our posts aren't going to move at all. But every once in a while, this deck is a little bit smaller. If we had an intermediate post that wouldn't necessarily go into the ground, or even our 2 posts that are up against our building here, those posts just get attached to the rim joist. But if you remember from our framing portion of this deck, we went ahead and did that post pocket around that post. That helps secure that post quite a bit. So our 2 posts against the wall are nice and firm and aren't going to move. But you want to take care of that before you actually start installing the railing, because you want to make sure that those posts are nice and plumb and in line with your other posts. So our posts are ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate our first style of railing here. This is pretty much the basic style, or most basic style of railing you can do. It actually doesn't even meet some code requirements, but let's just say you were building a temporary ramp or doing temporary railing for a project that's going to be coming down in the future, or if it's just a project that isn't going to meant to be up for very long. So what this railing is it's just a bottom rail. It's going to be a middle rail and a top rail. And you just make it out of 2x4. So we would have one on the bottom here. We'd have this intermediate middle one, and then one right on the top. And then you could put a handrail on top of this. The reason why this doesn't necessarily meet code, most communities or towns have a 3.5-inch gap minimum between spindles or railing. And obviously we're going to have about a foot of a gap here. And you could accidentally crawl through here. A little kid could be walking on here, crawl through it, and fall off the deck. So this is just meant for temporary structures. So what we'll do, if you remember, I went ahead and cut everything to begin with. So our railing's already cut to the dimension that it's supposed to. And just in case one of our posts are just slightly out of plumb, we want to make sure that we take a little bit of time and get these cut to the dimension that they're supposed to be and bring these posts back into plumb. So go ahead and line up right to the top of our post here and screw it in. And I should mention that I'm using screws on this portion of the project. It has at least a good 1 to 1.5 inches of thread into the actual post. You could also use nails, but if you're going to use nails, make sure that you use ring shank or twist nails, because this is going to be a safety railing. So if you were just using common box nails or sinkers, it's not going to have any grip, and over time as you lean on this, it could fall away from the post and those nails could come loose. So make sure you're using some type of nail that has a grip if you're going to use nails. So I'm going to get my screw started here, and I see that I'm about a 1/16 inch long, and this post, since it doesn't go in the ground, probably is just a little bit out of plumb. So I'm going to bring that right to the edge of my 2x4, since I know this is the length I'm supposed to be at, and go ahead and screw it in. All right, so that's basically our top rail. What I would do is I would go ahead and put 4 screws in each post. And again, this is going to be our finished product, so if it was going to be staying, you would want to make sure that those 4 screws are evenly spaced and make sure it looks nice when it's done. I'm going to go ahead and install my other 2 rails here, and then I'll finish screwing off the rails after they're hung. Same concept. Come in the bottom here and get 1 screw in. Come on the other side. And then for our middle post, all I'm going to do is split the difference and put it right in the center. So I got 27 inches here. I'm going to take half of that and make a mark. All right, got 13 and a half. And that center point is going to be the center of our board. So I'm going to go ahead and strike a line and then drop that 1 inch and 3/4 because our board is 3.5 inches wide. And I want to take half of that, which is 1 inch and 3/4. And that's going to be the bottom of our rail from that line. All right, ready? Go ahead, take this last board, line it up with our line, and screw it into place. Oop. All right, that is the 3 rails of our railing here. So then the last step would be to go ahead and bring the rail all the way around the deck here, and then we would come back and put a 2x6 cap on here, which we'll demonstrate after we get all the other rails on, but that would be the last step. All right, our next set of railing here is another very simple set of railing. The only biggest difference, instead of having that middle rail, our safety is going to basically be our spindles here. And this is a type of railing that would meet most codes because we have less than 3.5 inches here between spindles, and there's no way a baby can get their head stuck in between there or a kid can go through. So this is a little bit more safer style of railing. It's real simple. Basically it has a top rail and a bottom rail. And the way I got those measurements was to go from the back of my post here to the inside of my stair post. And again, we're not going to bring our railing all the way across here because we have a set of stairs here. Then I went ahead and got a measurement and then took that measurement and cut my top and bottom rails. And then I went ahead and cut my spindles. So the way I got my spindle height was I went from the top of my post here down to the deck board, and that should be right now 35 and a half, or sorry, 34. 35 and a half is going to be our final height. 34, but then I also want a little bit of a gap here. If you noticed on our first handrail, we went ahead and put that, or I should say railing, we put our bottom rail all the way tight to the deck. I'm not really too concerned because that's just going to be temporary railing. But if we were to have this in a climate that maybe has a lot of snow, it's going to be kind of painful to try to get right up next to that bottom rail and clean all that snow out. So a little bit different scenario is to bring your railing up off the deck just a little bit. I'm going to have about 1.5 inches to 2 inches underneath my bottom rail. And then as you're shoveling, you can go ahead and get some of that snow out from underneath the bottom rail, or if there's leaves, it just makes sweeping just a little bit easier. One note with that is if you're going to go with that style of railing that has the bottom rail off the deck, I suggest having your post just a little bit closer because on the front here, we have about a 7.5 to 8 foot span here. If you span that railing this whole distance, that's pretty much a lot of, or it is a lot of weight for the top and bottom railing. Once you get all these spindles on, it'll look nice for about 6 months, but after that, you're going to start getting some dips in your railing. So stick with some tighter post spacings if you're going to do that type of railing. So after we cut our top and bottom rail here, I went ahead and cut my spindles to length. And instead of just throwing these on willy-nilly, there's a little bit of a trick to get these nice and centered with your post here. You want to visually, when you're looking at your railing, you want to have your posts or your spindles centered with your post. You don't want to just start on the edge here and work your way across, because you'll have no gap here and you might have a little or smaller gap over on this side. So what I did was I went ahead and found the center point of my top and bottom. It was going to be this spindle here, and I made a mark, and I put this first spindle right on that center mark. And then I went ahead and cut a spacer. Most codes that I've encountered is 3.5. You can go ahead and use a 2x4 for a spacer. I like to go down to 3 inches because if you're getting your final inspection and one of those is 3 5/8, that building inspector has every right to tell you to take all those spindles off and make sure they're at the right spacing. So go at 3 inches, and it's just a little bit of a safeguard, and you can't screw up that way. But had my center rail here, then I went ahead and put this spacer in and butted up my next spindle to it, and went ahead and screw it in, and just kept that process going all the way along here, and then did the same process on the bottom and had that same spacer, and then you know you're evenly spaced. The biggest thing that you want to pay attention though when doing this is make sure you have that same center mark on top and bottom. If those are offset a little bit, when you go to install this railing, your spindles aren't going to be perfectly plumb and it's going to look horrible. So take that extra time to make sure that center mark is perfect. Make sure that when you're butting these spindles up, that you butt them up nice and tight and there's no gap in there, because once one's off, that's going to magnify as you go down the railing. So we got our spindles on, our top rails are cut to length, and we're ready to go ahead and install this railing. So what we can do is we can go ahead and bring it up into place here, and AJ can hold that side. And what I'm going to do, since these spindles only have one screw in it, we're basically pivoting. So to get this perfect, I'm just going to go ahead and screw the top into place first, because I know that's exactly going to be in the right location when it's finished. And I'll get a screw in here. And I should note, I don't know if you guys can see, but I went ahead and pre-drilled this. This is basically finished carpentry here. So when you get your screws, I'm going to put 4 screws in this post. I went ahead and pre-drilled these because there's nothing worse than screwing these 2 right close to the end grain here and having this split out. It just looks really ugly when it's finished. So I went ahead and pre-drilled all these. It also gives you the proper screw spacing and just makes a better looking finished product. So I'm going to go ahead and come over to this corner, also get a screw in. Make sure it's nice and flush to the top of my post. And now you can see my bottom is probably about a ½ inch off. That doesn't mean I cut my pieces wrong. It just means that this isn't perfectly square right now. So I'm going to go ahead, well, AJ already pushed it over for me. Go ahead and get this nice and flush with the inside of my post. And now you can see I have a nice even reveal between my spindle and my post, and we're nice and plumb. And now the rest of my spindles also follow suit because we had that equal spacer in there. So what I can do now is I'll go ahead and finish screwing off all 4 screws on each post, and this railing is fully installed. Okay, so the final set of railing that I'm going to show here is just a little bit nicer set of railing. Just spruces up the deck just a little bit. It's the same concept of that railing as far as spindle spacing. But basically what it is it has this top rail for the spindles and bottom rail for the spindles. And then this is going to be sandwiched between 2 2x4s laying flat. So I would have a bottom one here, and then this one would come up here and just form a nice fancy handrail here. So the biggest difference with this one is these spindles are going to be attached from the top. So there's a little bit of extra step that we have to do here. And I should kind of mention, to to get the dimension, or at least the length of our top and bottom spindle rail here, whenever I'm pre-cutting these, I like to take the measurement, and especially when volunteers are putting these together, because you're never going to get these posts exactly where you want them. They might be an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch off by the time you actually get to railing. So you can take this measurement, and I got 80 inches here. And when I go have the volunteers cut these, I'm going to have them cut this top and bottom spindle at 81. I'm going to add that extra inch, and they can go ahead and install it. And then when it comes, or go ahead and put it to pre-make it, prefabricate it. And then when it's time to actually go put these in place, we can get it right where it wants, or it's supposed to be, scribe the line on here, and then we can go ahead and make that final cut, and it'll fit perfectly. But if you try to cut it right at the right measurement to begin with, it might be a half a day to a day before you actually install the railing, and these posts might warp just a little bit, and it just doesn't look very good. So go ahead and cut these a little bit long. You'll still be able to get your center point off of it, and then you can center it in the opening, scribe it, and cut it, and it'll perfectly fit. So we got our spindle lengths here. I went ahead and installed all of them except the last one. Again, we started with the center one here, and then worked both ways and installed all these. But I just wanted to show you this last one, because it is just a little bit different going from the top. But you can put it in place here, and we're going to need a pre-drill bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-drill the screw, but then I'm also going to be putting in a finish nail. It's going to make a little bit more sense here in a second. But if you can kind of imagine, if we just screw down from the top on all these, no matter how tight we screw it, these spindles are basically going to be able to spin within the top and bottom rail. So what I do is right in the corner, I'll put an extra nail in, and that will help to keep it from spinning. Just make sure whenever you are getting these thin finish nails that you get the hot dip galvanized ones, because again, we're going into treated lumber, and all of our fasteners have to be approved for that treated lumber. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my spacer in between here. Again, we went with that 3-inch spacing. I'll take my drill bit and get it right in the center of that spindle and pre-drill for the screw. Okay. And then we can go ahead and drive a screw through that spindle. And you want to make sure that spindle, again, is nice and tight to the previous spindle and nice and square with the rail. Okay. Nice and flush with the front. And then once it's square between the railing here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to eyeball that corner, and I'm not going to drill straight down. I want to come in just a little bit of an angle so our nail doesn't accidentally come through the corner here. So I'm going to find that corner and screw it just a little bit of an angle towards the center. All right. And then we can go ahead and drive that nail in. Get it nice and flush, and now this spindle will never be able to twist within these top and bottom rails. So we can go ahead and flip this guy over, get our spacer block, and repeat the process on the bottom. All right, so all of our spindles are now installed. So then the next step that we want to do here is we can go ahead and put this aside for half a second. And we're going to get our top and bottom rails in place. And one thing I should note is when selecting your rails, you want to sight down your board and try to pick the straightest boards that you have for this. Because we're going to snap a chalk line on this, and that's going to be our reference point to line this up. This is just 1x material, and as you put all those spindles in there, it's going to warp over time. It's not straight. So you're going to need a nice straight guideline to guide your spindle rails onto this board to make sure they're nice and straight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, our goal here is to center our railing on this 2x4. So I know my dimension here is 1.5 inches. So 1/2 inch is 3/4. And I want to come off our center line 3/4 inch, and then I'll go ahead and snap a line. We'll come in here, 1/2 of 3.5, which is our 2x4, is 1 3/4 inches, and then we'll come back that 3/4 inch. Do the same on this side. 1 3/4 inches. Come back 3/4 inches. And now we can go ahead and snap this line. Where'd my shot line go? And then we'll know that this should be the edge of our railing on this board. All right. So what we can do is grab our railing here. AJ, you want to give me a hand? We'll go ahead and throw this on top here. I'll start on that end if you want to grab over here. We'll get this lined up. And then we'll go ahead and screw this in place. I need to get a different set of screws here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, line this up with my line, and then go ahead and drive a screw right through my bottom spindle rail here into our bottom rail, making sure that our edge is nice and lined up with this chalk line all the way down. And then I know I've straightened my railing up, and then we'll go ahead and attach our top rail. So I'm going to go grab those different sets of screws, and I'll be right back. All right, so I got my different screws here. I want to use at least about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches, because I don't want to go all the way through my board here. I'm literally just attaching it to this top and bottom rail. So we'll come in here, follow our chalk line, and screw these into place. All right, so went ahead and got the bottom in, and I made sure that we're right along our line here. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over and do the same exact thing for our other rail, and then we'll be ready to cut this to length and install it. All right, so we went ahead and got our top and bottom plate on here, and now the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and mark our length. Like I said before, especially when prefabricating this, before we actually get to this point, to keep volunteers busy, it's a good idea to leave a good 1/2 inch on both sides to fine tune it when it comes time to install it. So what I've done, so I went ahead and centered this between my 2 posts here, and it's real important. We took all that time to center our center spindle here. I want to take off both sides of this post, or of this railing here. So I'm going to take a little bit off this end, and I'm going to take a little bit off this end, so my center spindle is still centered within these 2 posts. If you just notch off or take off one end, then you're not going to be centered within your post anymore. So make sure you center it. And the last thing I'm going to do real quick is just make sure that my spindle is plumb here, which it looks like we're spot on. So what I can do is come over carefully without moving this, and I'll go ahead and just take a pencil or pen here and mark my posts. And this will be the exact amount that I want to take off on each side. All right, now that those are marked, I can take this down. I'm just going to use a speed square to strike a 90-degree line across there. And then I'll take a circular saw and nip off all 4 of these corners, and it'll fit within our opening nice and tight. All right, so we have a perfect fit here. We went ahead and put it between our posts here. I went ahead and made sure we're nice and flush, and I've did 2 toe screws, one through both sides into the top of each of our posts here, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same in our bottom. So made sure it's nice and flush. Come back just a little bit here and toe screw that right into the post. Do the same on this side. And then I'll go ahead and also do the same on the inside of the rail as well. One on the inside here and on the other side. I did want to mention real quick here, our spindle spacing is nice and accurate. We have the same distance at the bottom between our posts as the top in our spindle. But one last thing to mention here, because we came from the center, I didn't put my last spindle in because it's going to technically sink into the post a little bit. But we can't leave this gap here because it's larger than our 3.5 inch code. So 2 ways of tackling this. You can just take your last spindle, go ahead and put it in place. And in our case here, it doesn't look too horrible. You can't really tell that we're about 3/8 of an inch shorter here than we are here. And you can go ahead and do it on this side too. But this one's a little long. I'll have to trim it down. But what we can do to make this even nicer is go ahead and take that 3/8 of an inch off the back of here and make that spacing nice and equal. Go ahead and install that, and then we can run a screw coming in here and coming in the bottom, and then we'll have a nice even spacing all the way across. So we'll go ahead and tackle that as well and get this screwed off on the inside, and then we'll be ready for our top handrails. Okay, so we have now entered our handrail stage of the project. This is going to be the last stage of completing our deck here. So it's real simple. Basically, I chose a handrail that's going to cover the width of our post and the width of our railing here. So a 2x6 gives us that coverage, plus it gives us a nice little overhang here for a little bit of extra detail. And this particular set of railing here is about as simple as it can get. I literally came from the back of this post to our stairwell opening here, cut the piece to length, and then put it on top and screwed it in place. One note, again, this is going to be the finished handrail. People are going to be having their hands along here. So you want to make sure that the screws are placed nice and straight, as well as after you get those screws done, take all that extra wood that comes up around the screws and get that cleaned up nice and neat. And then when it comes time to actually staining the deck, you can actually come over this with a belt sander or a palm sander and get this nice and smooth, and there's no splinters. The second thing you want to look for is any ugly knots. This is going to be your show side. So I have a little bit of a knot here, but it's all tight. There's no knots going to fall out, and there's also no splinters on these boards. So I got my other 3 here. I have a little bit of a knot here, but that's something we can just take a belt sander over and clean that up nice and neat. You just don't want any of those loose ones that have those sharp points to them, because again, people will be sliding their hands over this, and you want it to be nice and smooth. So I went ahead and did my 4 screws right in the top, and you want to minimize your screws here because it's going to be that show piece. And then along the middle of the rail here, I just chose to put 1 screw right in the middle, right into my outer railing piece here, and that's going to hold this railing up nice and tight. But I don't need to go crazy. I don't need to go every 6 inches or so, just enough to hold this top piece on so it won't fall off. So this one's nice and simple. We have a corner on this side, and typically you don't have 2 or 3 different styles of railings going on. You just have the one. So had a little bit of a tricky corner here, but the concept's going to be the same. Anytime you have 2 railings coming into each other, you want to finish off with a nice miter joint. I just have my board sitting here, but we're going to focus a little bit of extra time getting this miter joint screwed tight so it doesn't come apart and so it stays nice. But same concept though. We have a 2x6 running all along this rail, 2x6 running all along this rail, and they meet at this miter. So you may have mentioned or noticed too, I went ahead and cut this one to length. It's nice and flush in the back. But we're going to have a set of stairs coming off the front here. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this one long for the time being. So whenever we get our stairs and our stair hand railing, I can go ahead and focus on making a nice clean cut wherever that stair railing meets up with this. So I'm going to just run this long for right now. But the first step that we're going to do here is we're going to focus on this miter. Miter is just a nice 45-degree line or 45-degree cut. On this board and on this board, they meet and they make 90 degrees. So what I'm going to do to make this tight, you can kind of see they're at different levels right now. I'm just going to get these at the right angle so it can close, just like that. And then I'm going to run a screw through the corner here and bring these two miters tight. All along focusing on making sure they're nice and flush and brought together tight. Just like so. So I'm going to go and do that on the outer overhang here where we're not going to have anything to screw to. And then I can focus on this corner when it comes time to actually screwing it into the post. But now that I've just moved these boards, you want to take a little bit of extra time here and make sure that you're located right where you need to be. Nice and flush on the back here. I'm going to knock this into place here. All right, and I'm going to get it nice and flush here. And again, I'm just going to be focusing right on this miter right now. I'm not worrying too much about this because I want to get this nice and secure. And then I'm going to work outwards from this miter because as I get a few nails out here, I'll be able to kind of use a little bit of leverage. This won't move because it's all screwed down, and then I can get the rest of the board straight from there. So always focus on your miters first. But have a little bit of a ledge here, so I'm going to go ahead and put this screw in my top rail on this side. All right, and I brought that nice and flush. Our miter is closed, and this is the one point just for this demonstration. Typically I would have that same railing coming along this side. I don't have any rail here. But what you would do is I would have this top rail on this side if it was the same decking. And I would be able to, if I find my screws here, just imagine there's that top rail here. I would go ahead and put the screw on the same location on the other side. And that would bring these two right to the same height. And then what I can do is in addition to those two screws on this side of the miter, I'm going to go about the same distance away from my miter and make sure that I hit my outer rails here. Okay. I'm going to put another screw in here. Nice and neat. Taking extra time to make sure they're lined up properly. All right, so I got my 4 screws in my post there. My miter is closed. It's looking nice and neat. And then what I'm going to do is just double check that I'm still pretty close to being flush on all 4 corners. And then I'm going to come out about a foot and then screw into my top rail again. Again, I would have a railing here if these were the same rails. I'm just going to put it in the outside rail here. But ideally you'd want it to be the same. Okay, so now those 6 screws will be enough to keep that miter tight. As I come out here and adjust the rest of this board, my miter is going to stay tight and I can get it flush all the way along the rest of the railing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way down, going about every 24 inches or so, and screw this deck board off. All right, again, I'm going to leave this end for right now in case I have to make any cuts for the stair railing. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and finish off putting in a second screw where I screwed to that first screw. Because I want this handrail to be sitting flat the whole time. If you just go on this one side, over time this will dry out and it'll start to warp on you. So I'm going to go ahead and put a second screw at every location. And again, I'm going to take that extra time to make sure they're all lined up nice and straight, because this is going to be our finished piece. All right, so we can go ahead and finish screwing off this last handrail here, and all of our handrails are in place.